that they're really good measurement for biological age or predicting your future health. We do this as a consumer product, so this is something that's available to pretty much everybody, and we can offer it globally. Maybe there's 3 countries we can't at the moment. Everywhere else we pretty much can. We sell to we are available for clinicians as well. These are private, so it's not something that's on reimbursement, but that is our end goal. And we're also developing novel biomarkers for menopause, cardiovascular disease and diabetes, which are prognostic, so they can predict this happening in the future.
Thank you. Well, we are almost at the top of the hour, and I'll just make sure. Hi, Avi. How are you? You're also in London. Do you want to say hello?
Oh, I'm not in London. I'm in Oxford.
Oh yeah,
which
Oxford. Oops.
Yeah, which is a village. London is a city. But no. Hello, everyone. But we're here for Nikolina. So and GlycanAge. So yeah. Thank you for inviting me, Laura. To be a co-moderator. I was a scientist once, but now I'm just a biotech entrepreneur and an angel investor. So I'm eager to hear this conversation, and we have lots of questions that Laura and I have drafted, Nikolina, for you. And Nikolina, it was lovely to meet you in person as well.
Yeah, it's really nice that we can actually meet in person now.
So we're gonna get started. Of course, my dog Mobile has to say hello.
Yay! Hi, Mobile. It's lovely to hear you. Laura, take over anytime, and it's always lovely to hear Mobile.
I'm going to start over again because we are recording. I just wanted to remind everybody that we are recording this session. So when we do the Q&A part of it, you are allowing us to use your voice or image if we place it somewhere online. Anyways, thank you everybody for being here. Welcome to the MYKIGAI Club. My name is Ramin Kini and I'm the founder of this club as well as MYKIGAI, a platform dedicated to making longevity accessible for everyone. We do this with education tools, a community, and most importantly, giving access to evidence-based products at amazing members-only prices. And though I am still workshopping or tagline or when we are pitching to investors, I'd like to say that we're sort of a Groupon for longevity, better than Groupon though. In any case, today I'm very happy to have Nikolina Lauc, the founder and CEO of GlycanAge. And the topic that we're going to learn about today is her biological age, because her company provides this service. It's a diagnostic at-home test that you can take. And we're going to have a series of questions to talk about her journey to being a founder, the technology that they've developed, and why it matters to know your biological age. Co-moderating with me is Dr. Avi Roy, a good friend of mine, an advisor, and amazing longevity person all around, and Girish Harinet, who is our MYKIGAI geroscientist in residence. He is the person that is able to help our community with any questions they have and also spends time co-moderating rooms here with me. Girish, if you want to say hi, as you're the only one who hasn't said hello.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll make it quick. I'm a longevity researcher within an academic setting, study all things pharmaceutical, non-pharmaceutical interventions and how they affect lifespan, the number of years we live on this earth, and health span, those percentage of our years that are lived in relatively good health of mind, body, and brain. So excited to be part of this conversation. Biomarkers of aging are absolutely powerful, and the top of the list is GlycanAge, in my opinion. So excited to commence.
Great. So, Nina, can you please? We're going to start with you telling us a bit more about GlycanAge and how it came about to be, and what is it that you exactly do. From there, we're going to move to talk about biological age. But can you tell us more about GlycanAge?
Yeah. So we actually came out of a research lab, and it was so. My father is a very hard scientist, glycobiologist, and he's been working in this space for about 3 decades. And 11 years ago, he told me I can measure aging. or I can measure some biological type of aging. And I don't think I understood what that was then, but he, over the last 10 years, he managed to convince me this is something really important. And it took me some time because I think aging is still a little bit of a dirty word. We don't really connect it to health. We more connect it to something personal and don't really understand or communicate in a way that that's aging is actually the inflection point of a decline. And if we intervene with this decline as aging, then we can prevent all of these age-related diseases that come later on. So it's actually preventive medicine. And the key question, so when they first found this out, the key question was, is this something you can change? Or is it just something that's different in different people and there's nothing you can do about it? And over the last 10 years, did a lot of studies where they had genetic profiles of people, they had all their clinical biomarkers, and we know that this genetic influence on this glycan aging we measure is 30 to 50%. But then a big part of it is also your past environment with epigenetic influences, your current environment, and your behavior and lifestyle. So there's a big part of it you can actually influence and change. And we measure aging by looking at the immune system. So you have different molecular clocks which look at different things. We look at the immune system, and we see that through time. Uh, and we actually look at antibodies. So we look at glycans, and I'll tell you what glycans are in a minute because that's a longer discussion. But we look at glycans on IgG, which is the most prevalent antibody in blood. And we see that as people are getting older, they accumulate these, we call them bad glycans. They're only bad in the sense that they're pro-inflammatory and they create chronic inflammation, but they're good if you're fighting a virus or a pathogen. It's just that this acute response is positive, but when it accumulates, then you're damaging yourself through time. And as we age, we accumulate the bad ones and we decline in these anti-inflammatory ones. So there's this misconception that as you're older, you have a underactive immune system, and that's not true. You have a dysregulated immune system. So you have too much of a response to the wrong thing, and you don't shut that inflammation down fast enough. And pretty much every age-related chronic disease is connected to this chronic inflammation, like cardiovascular disease, metabolic diseases, autoimmune, rheumatoid arthritis, osteoporosis, so forth. Everything has a connection to inflammation. And we also now know that you can change this with lifestyle. So one thing they say, and this was a long time ago now, there was these longitudinal human studies where they proved that you can have an extra 13 years of healthy life if you're living a healthy lifestyle. So everybody has this capacity to gain another 13 years of healthy life by living a healthy lifestyle. But that's very individual. And usually we get the feedback that our lifestyle is not good for us too late. We get the feedback when already we've developed something, we have symptoms, and we're too far in a disease state. So it comes as a shock. But actually, this is something that starts years before. And if we look at it on a molecular level and we detect it early and then change our behavior, change our lifestyle, then we can prevent or delay it as much as possible. And we do this today. We developed a commercial product. So it's a simple dry blood test you can do at home. Then it goes to the lab, and it's a very complicated process. It's still about 10 days of chemical steps in the lab until we extract your glycans, and then we look at their composition. And then we give you a report on your biological aging, but we're also giving you association and all of these different glycan structures and peaks that we're measuring. Do you want me to go on, or do you want to ask some questions as well?
No, please go on. It's funny because I was messaging Avi and saying, well, she's kind of answering our questions point by point. You said what are glycans, you say how it works. Please continue in terms of the importance. I would say if you can continue in the importance of measuring our biological age. I say this as a preamble. Last week, Dr. David Sinclair on the New York Times interview said that hopefully in the future, everybody will know their biological age. And I agree that this is very important. My understanding of my take on why it is important is because our chronological age doesn't really matter. What matters is how we are physically. And if we know how we are actually on our biology, we can affect the changes with a whatever we change in food, lifestyle, stop smoking if you're a smoker, or eating better, exercising more. Tell us more about how you, I mean, for one of the things that you talk a lot about with GlycanAge is this. So if you could go in that direction, that would be great.
So in a way, it doesn't really matter even how long we live. It's how long we're healthy. Because if you don't feel, and we spend about a quarter of our lives right now in ill health or with one and multiple chronic diseases, and that's not an enjoyable life. And at one point, it gets unbearable to the point that you probably don't want to go on. So what's important is this healthy years of life. And our healthcare or medicine does this in a very poor way today, because they look at by they do a test when already an organ is failing, and then they're identifying the organ, and then you're pretty much just treating the symptoms going on, and you stay in this chronic state. But if we can really detect it when it's still on the molecular level, where you're headed towards that direction, but you're not at this end stage where you're symptomatic, and you can or you can do those organ specific tests, then you can actually do something about it with lifestyle, and maybe pharmacology comes a little bit later on. And I did say about glycans, but I'll try to explain it. And glycans are sugars, or they're complex carbohydrates. And when we say sugars, you have to forget everything you know about sugars, because this part of science has been here since we've been multicellular. So it's not a new part of us. It's been here forever. It just hasn't been popularized like microbiome, genetics, and epigenetics. But basically, sugars are a structural component of all of your cells, and all the proteins we've had. And proteins are the workhorse of the cell. Since we've been multicellular, are glycoproteins, which means they have a protein part and they have a glycan part. And this glycan part actually regulates how they function. So when we look at GlycanAge, or the glycans we focus, they're actually a very rare type of glycans. They're just glycans on antibodies, or an IgG, which is the most prevalent one. But you have them everywhere. You have them on pretty much all proteins. You have them on fat cells. They're a key part of biology in the way that, yes, we eat sugars. So we confuse them with the sugars we eat, or we confuse them with HbA1c, or um, uh, AGEs and so forth, but it has nothing to do with it. These are sugars that we create, both with the genetic influence, with the epigenetic influence, and then also how we're behaving today. So they give us a very complete picture of what's going on in the body. So I hope I didn't complicate that a bit too much. But yes, and also if you're looking at therapeutics, there are even some, we had a mice study where mice were giving this precursor to salic acid, which is a sugar. So mice were fed a high-fat diet, and they become obese, and they develop hypertension. But if you give them this precursor to a sugar, they become fat, but they don't develop hypertension. So you can prevent hypertension in mice with a sugar supplement, which is not a drug, it's a supplement. So they're a very exciting part of modern medicine, both in diagnostics and then maybe therapeutics, but this is a little bit further on.
Thank you, Nikolina. And Laura is right. You're literally, like, all the questions that we have, you're just, I don't know if Laura sent it to you, but you're literally just answering all of them, like, one by one yourself, without us having to actually ask the question. So I think you explained it really well, what glycans are. And so this is going to be a little bit redundant, but like sometimes it really helps to explain concepts from different sides, because you actually mentioned several things like HbA1c and IgGs, which are acronyms, and not everybody is familiar with that. I think it would be useful because people have heard of things like glycosylation or glycation, and what is the difference between that? And I still remember your dad talking to me about that in the last chat. I know you're not a scientist, but I'm sure, and I've looked at your website, you have a simple definition of like what is the difference between what people always talk about, which is glycosylation, glycation, and what you're talking about, glycans. And I know that you may have a short answer for that, and you already talked about it. So I also want to know if there is any difference between men and women in their glycan profile as they age.
Yeah, so I have a very simple way of explaining it. So Glycation is how our body responds to sugars we eat, simple sugars. Glycosylation is sugars that we produce as a structural component of our biology. And you asked about gender differences. We see actually, because it's the immune system, and there's a lot of that beyond glycans, just looking at different parts of how men and women are different by immune system. We see that men age in a very linear way. So they just go up and down in this bad glycans, down, up in the bad ones, down in the good ones. While women have a curve. In a way, they have a better functioning immune system in reproductive age, and then they have a more rapid shift as they approach menopause. And also, there's a very big difference. So there's a gender variation, but then there's also um, inter-individual variation in a way that not all women are the same. So we see that some women have this really pronounced curve, or they would be very young just until a couple years before menopause. And then another type of woman would follow it more precisely. So she'll be closer to her actual age and will behave a little bit more similar to how the men's glycans behave. And we're doing a lot of research in this space, and it is connected to estrogen because we're men and women because of hormones. So we are, and we know that these certain glycans are correlated to levels of estrogen, but also it's the balance of the immune system. So estrogen can be both pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory. It's really this optimal balance. And we're hoping that when we do a little bit more research here, it can also be decision making of when a woman should maybe be replacing these hormones. Because if you replace them too early, you might not have the right response. If you replace them too late, it also may be too late to do something about it. And it could be used as a novel diagnostic for perimenopause. Because right now we have very poor diagnostic for most hormone-related problems in women, but particularly perimenopause, where it can, because you can still have your cycle, you can have your cycle for years before you actually enter into full menopause. And most of the time you're misdiagnosed. So you have a cycle and you have hot flashes, or you have joint pain, or you have depression, anxiety, heart palpitations. And all of these things can be something else. So most of the time, the woman just goes on the wrong drug because you don't have a test you can run. And if you're just looking at her hormones, they're more of a daily measurement because they fluctuate so much. So you're never really seeing an accurate picture. You just do a lab test and you're normal, or you're normal one day and then you're maybe a little bit abnormal, but then you're normal again. So having these longitudinal biomarkers could really transform menopause diagnostics and menopause care.
I'm glad you mentioned menopause, because I think one of the things that women don't realize is that during this period, our rate of aging accelerates. And it's one of the reasons why women tend to suffer more of neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's and other things. But I find very exciting the idea, as you mentioned, being able to know more about your biomarkers at that point in time. But I think another thing that I find interesting in the importance of knowing your biological age is that one of the things that you mentioned many times to me, that a lot of people that are athletes or that work out a lot and seem extremely healthy actually have a higher GlycanAge. Can you tell us more about that? Because it's kind of illuminating in terms of people realizing that how we perceive our health and actually testing our biomarkers are different things.
So one also key thing, there's nobody like you, or there's no standard human. Whatever diet, exercise type, it has to be modeled to you individually. Otherwise, it may be causing you more harm than good. And with exercise, a lot of time, over exercise, it's very easy to do over exercise. So back maybe 6-7 years ago, we did this. So when we saw we have this molecular aging clock, how can we stop it or prevent it? We thought, let's do a gym study. So we did 1,000 people going to the gym. And this was never published because the guys who paid for the study, they didn't like the results. And well, actually, and we looked at it in a little bit of a, so we looked at 40s and 60s, so it was more going towards middle age, and they mainly overtrained them. And when we looked at smaller types of training, we saw that actually we understood why this happens. But first we were shocked. We thought, of course, going to the gym every day, has to be good for you. Going from a sedentary lifestyle into a gym obsessed lifestyle should have big benefits for your health. And actually, it's a misconception. And the misconception is that also when people exercise, they diet. And when you're exercising, you're doing damage. So you're building new muscle, you're doing tissue damage, and you have to fuel this repair. And if you do a little bit of that damage, so we looked at all kinds of interval sports and sprints, that does make you younger. So this they call it hormesis, or acute stress, is good for us because it kind of wakes up this um, system that was asleep to regenerate ourselves. But it only works if you can repair it. So if you do damage and then you repair it, and that tissue becomes younger. But if you do more damage than you can repair, then you're just accumulating damage. And one way this happens in sports is that you do caloric deficiency or energy insufficiency, so you're not feeding yourself properly because you're trying to lose weight, and then you're doing intensive exercise on top, and this is too much stress for the body. So this just accumulates damage, and that's what we see in pro athletes. So in pro athletes, soccer players, rugby players, American football players, unless they're very good at recovery and unless they invest a lot in their recovery and in their nutrition, they're generally older. And it's not uncommon for them to be 15, 20 years older. And if you look at them compared to an average career, if you look at an athlete's career compared to an average person's career, their career is done by the age of 30 or 34. They're an old athlete. They can't play the sport anymore physically. And if you look at any other career at 30, 34, they're a young person. Their career is just starting. So you do actually age your body by doing too much sports. And the problem is then when you go into the gym, they train you like an athlete. And not just that is intense, but also you have a stressful job. You have all kinds of other things which you put on top of the sports that you're doing. And all of that just creates more harm than good. So sports is good, but you have to fuel it properly. And of course, the opposite is also bad. If you're a couch potato and you have GlycanAge is pretty like high BMI will influence your GlycanAge. Having high fat and not having high BMI will still, so body composition will influence your GlycanAge. So you cannot not move, not have exercise in your life. But the way the culture we have in the gyms, it's wrong. So the whole no pain, no gain, and the whole misconception that you have to diet and exercise at the same time, it just works against you. And that's probably, and I'm sorry if there's any gym owners or PTs in the room, but that's how the fitness industry works. They get all of their members January to March, and they have 40% of their revenue in those 3 months. And then all of these people try to go to the gym as intensively as they're recommended, and then they give up. And then they still pay their membership because they feel guilty. But at one point, their body just tells them, this is too much. You're damaging yourself. Please stop going to the gym. That's my theory, at least. But we do see that smart sports, or sports which are fueled appropriately, so the right nutrition to support the damage that you're doing, then that's you can be a professional athlete and you can be 20, 30 years younger. But it comes with a lot of good nutritional and sports science, and a lot of us do it wrong.
Avi, I think you wanted to mention
Yeah,
something.
I was just unmuting myself. Nikolina, I concur with you to a great extent, and that is really interesting, everything that you're saying. But I don't think athletes retire. I want to push back on that because regardless of that, I mean, we have longitudinal analysis of how muscle mass changes in the skeletal muscle. So whether you are an athlete or not, your type 1 fibers decrease and your type 2 fibers increase. And also the type 1 fiber, the loss of type 1 fibers in the muscle mass, I'm just picking on one thing, for example, that changes during aging. The loss of type 1 fibers in your muscle are replaced by connective tissue and fat. I mean, everyone here has eaten a tough piece of meat. That's one thing. There is a decline in your bone mass, regardless of whether you are exercising or not. I mean, athletes retire early because 35-year-old athletes cannot compete with 20-year-old or 25-year-old athletes. I almost think that athletes showcase what other people who don't have those kind of performance jobs are suffering through, which is the biological degradation process. Athletes just showcased earlier, athletes don't retire at 35 because they want to, but because they have to, because biology just doesn't keep up. And so when you see a 70-year-old person showing their six packs on Facebook, there are functionally a worse version of them than when they were 25. There is no doubt about that. And we have this biological fundamental decline. I guess you're saying that athletes have accelerated aging, and by testing their glycans, you can possibly detect and differentiate them from somebody who is 35-year-old chronologically, but has less biological damage to their system. If I understand correctly, that's what you're saying, right?
Yes. So as a cohort, they're generally older, but that doesn't mean that every athlete is. And absolutely, to your point, you have to maintain muscle mass as you're aging, so you should exercise. It's just about exercising smartly. And there's actually really good. There was a study we did, but you have lots of these looking at competitive bodybuilding, and we looked at one looking at bikini fitness, and these were women who were of a normal weight, so they were not overweight, but they went on intensive dieting and exercise, and they went from a healthy baseline to 5, 10 years younger within a couple of months. And they also lose their cycle. And it's very common for women who overtrain to lose their cycle. So, in a way, overexercise mimics menopause, or it suppresses gonadal hormones in women, and they lose bone density. So it mimics um, or bone. It mimics osteopenia. So it mimics aging in multiple ways beyond just inflammation. But we also looked at gene expression of the everything connected to the immune system. So there's lots of levels to support that overexercise is bad, but it's just finding the right level of exercise. So what I'm saying is that we don't measure it well now. So we make these misconceptions about health, and the misconception is that in the gym is no pain, no gain. So you're always going to push yourself to a point of pain, and that's going to be a point of pride. And I think that's wrong. I think exercise, which it doesn't need to be painful, and you should have it. It should be healthy exercise, but I think the whole cultural element of it pushes it a bit too far based on a misconception.
Thank you for explaining that. Laura or Girish?
Girish, did you want to ask a question? I just wanted to let everybody know that we are very shortly going to open the floor for questions. So I've seen some hands up. We are going to bring you up soon. We're just going to finish the Q&A part with Nina, and then we're going to start bringing people up to ask the questions directly to Nina. Girish?
Yeah, absolutely. No, this is such a fascinating discussion. And I think, just highlighting the importance of rest and recovery when you think about exercise, it's not enough to just go, 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 blitz, blitz, blitz during the actual exercise session. But, one of the things we study in labs is the post exercise effects. And a lot of the magic, a lot of the recovery from the damage accrued during exercise, a lot of the activation of various genes that are responsible for regulating heart rate and improving heart rate variability, for making the appropriate epigenetic and gene expression changes that promote overall health and longevity occur after the exercise session is over. So I think, this conversation is well taken. And then the other question I had for you, Nina, because something that comes to mind is, when you were testing the athletes, was it during their prime that they were biologically older? Or the other thing that I'm considering is, as when an athlete retires, that's a significant shock to the system. You're part of a specific training regimen, dietary protocol, exercise protocol. And then when they retire, a lot of athletes completely give up on that lifestyle in a big way. Many of them become obese, many of them develop metabolic syndrome. So I'm wondering, whether it's during their athletic period, and your point well taken about overtraining, but specifically with the athletes, is it during their prime athletic career, or is it after retirement when their biological age is tested?
So professional athletes as soccer groups, we don't have enough of them, but we did, if you look at people longitudinally, we did this big one that wasn't published, but then lots of small ones when we looked at them before they compete, during competing, and then after competing. And you do have so glycans have a big half-life. It takes about, they have a half-life of 3 weeks. It takes about 12 weeks for you to actually see, or let's say 6 weeks for you to see something. So they're going to be the same, unless they're more longitudinal, they're short term. So it doesn't catch the short term impact of exercise. It's always a little bit more long term impact of exercise on the immune system and on immune aging. And they recover. So if you look at competitive sports, they start at a more healthy baseline or close to their age, and then they recover a few months post competing. So you do recover that. If you look at, this was just competing sports or 40s, 60s going to the gym for the first time. It's different to people who do this as a career. Maybe 20 or 30, during their career, it's pretty common for them to be even 20, sometimes 30 years older. And these are 26, 27-year-old men. And when we look at their glycans, they look like glycans of an older person or somebody who is ill. And then when you look at them when they're retired, we maybe have 10 retired athletes, they're about 10, 15 years older. And there's so many different impacts here because these are young 26, 27-year-old, maybe they drink a lot, maybe there's a lot of other elements that impact it. Same as when they're retired. Maybe they've stopped all the good habits and they've kept all the bad habits. So there's lots of other factors being there, but we do see that even exercise alone can be damaging unless you're fueling it. So I think one thing we don't understand in sports is how to fuel sports properly, and that's probably also very individual. And we did do, so we know that, for example, weight has a big impact on biological aging. And if you lose weight, you will reduce your biological aging. And that's, as a general rule, it works unless you're losing weight for an unhealthy reason and unless you're underweight. And then when we looked at diets, and we looked at 1,000 people on 5 different diets, and this is from high protein to high carb, low protein, and all the various combinations, people are very individual. So in each of those groups, we had half of the people change in a significant way in the negative direction and half change in a positive direction. Even in the diet where you had high carbs and low protein, they would some people would benefit, or half people would benefit and half people would not. So we're very individual in how we respond to food, and there's many different elements here that play a part, and it's not even genetics or epigenetics, because you have this fantastic scientist called Tim Spector, and he writes a lot of he's leading the largest nutrition study in the world, and he was geneticist first. So he has over 20,000 twins. And he looked at all of these twins and he saw that even in the identical twins, this glucose response could be 100-fold different. So there's a huge part that's nothing to do with genetics or even epigenetics. That's microbiome, that's food that we had when we were young and so forth, that has an impact on it. And that gets all much more complicated in sports because you're creating damage and you need to fuel that damage. So this sports nutrition is a big area that I think needs some very good science behind it.
Well, I think nutrition in general, not even just sports nutrition, because I think one of the most exciting things about longevity science and biotech companies like yours is the aspect of combining precision medicine and precision diagnostics. And that's the exciting part, is that people should know that their biology is much like their own personality, personal to them. Not one person is the same. And we get all these tips, there's all these diet fads all the time, and people don't realize that what might work for some won't work for others, just because you are your own person. And with tests like yours, we can figure out more about our own biology. So just before I open it, the floor for questions, I know that you're developing a product for diagnostics during menopause. How does, I mean, obviously it's also glycan measuring, but can you tell us just a bit more about that?
So this is the I think one very good example of how we saw that reproductive health is connected to immune health is actually COVID. You had this whole kind of response to COVID within women where it would impact their cycle. And our immune aging and our reproductive aging are very much connected. And that's something that really needs to be explored more, and that's through inflammation. And we want to use it, we want to do a large enough study so we can precision it as a diagnostic, because we already see two categories of women. One will experience a more rapid menopause and her estrogen will decline a couple years before menopause. And then you have another type of woman who will have more gradual decline for longer years. To distinguish a lot of debates with clinicians now where in perimenopause they don't really know fully how to treat it, or there's a lot of debate between them where one would recommend one thing, somebody else would recommend something else, because there's no objective biological test you can run to have this feedback or to tell you what you should do in an objective way. So we really want to do, and we are pushing that space a lot. And we see that your GlycanAge is very much responsive to hormone replacement. And it's a balance of your immune system. So it's even not too much, not too little. So we want to look at it from a drug optimization type of view, or personalized medicine as it should be. So you're individually treated and there's something uh, objective you can use around it. Also timing. So when you do it is very important, because if you do it too late, the receptors are not as sensitive. So there was a big study that didn't see any positive benefit because it was introduced in women 10, 15 years post menopause, which is a little bit more difficult to treat. Also in men. But what's very interesting is that we see that as it is, so women have a very dramatic menopause. Men or andropause is very gradual. So we really see that with men tracks the aging curve. And it's pretty much the same, plus a couple other glycans we haven't looked at that are connected uh, to hormones and in a very direct way. So, for example, there was a study in the States where we got the samples a few years ago where they chemically induced menopause temporarily. And when you do it to women, so women mid 40s, before they were in menopause, they age 9 years within 5 months. The ones in placebo, so the ones that don't get replacement. The ones that get replacement, they stay in this healthy range or they don't age. So, and even there was a nice mice study recently where they gave mice a type of estrogen, a non-feminizing estrogen, and the mice lived 20% longer. So estrogen is a longevity drug, but it has to be properly dosed. There's a lot of hard science behind it that even our own, so us naturally having too high estrogen, it can be a risk for example, endometrial cancer. So it's really, and for that we need the progesterone to balance it out. So it's really this quite complex science of how you, and it's dangerous for you naturally. So if you're having other, like if your cycle is not regular and you're young, that is something you should be addressing from when it's there. Otherwise, not addressing it is a risk factor.
Well, I'm looking forward to that product when it is ready for the market. But speaking of products, I think it's important for people to know how GlycanAge works. Can you take us through the user, I guess, the experience for the users, so people here in the audience get a sense of what happens when they get GlycanAge?
We did, so we got down to very simple steps. It's a blood test you can do at home. So it's a box comes to your home address. There's a finger prick needle in there, and it's only 4 drops of blood, so you don't need to fill a veil, and it's pretty easy to do. You need 1 finger, maybe 2 if you're unlucky. Worst case 3. And then you leave that to dry for about an hour, hour and a half, and you put it back in the post. That goes to the lab. The lab takes, on average, if you're in the UK, it takes about 3 weeks. If you're in the States, Canada, or Australia, it's about 4 weeks. And when you get your results, we also pair you with our team which are both scientists and we call them health span doctors, or they're GPs, mainly NHS GPs, who had additional training in lifestyle medicine and nutrition, so they can give you advice based on lifestyle. And you're paired for this consultation call, and they will give you action steps which are very personalized to you, both based on what we know from science, what they know from their clinical experience, and give you a good educated guess on what type of behavioral change could benefit you. And then the advantage is that this is something that's not static. So whatever your result is to start with, it doesn't matter. What matters is what you can do to improve it. So you can improve a bad result, you can improve a good result. And it depends on you how much you want to push the limits. But we know that if you are improving your GlycanAge, you are increasing extra years of healthy life. And this was objectively evaluated actually in a recent comparison study done by Edinburgh University, where they looked at all of the clinical biomarkers we have today. They looked at all of the other molecular aging clocks like proteomics and the first generation epigenetic clocks. And glycans were most relevant, or acceleration of the glycan clock was most relevant to future health. So it really means something when you do reduce it. And what's fascinating is that you can reduce it with very simple things. So they would sometimes say, this is stuff that our grandmas have told us for the last 20 years. We just don't listen, like eating more vegetables. And we haven't done this in a proper study, but we've had a bunch of examples where just this more diversity of food or diversity of plants in a diet without changing any other factors, so without changing exercise load, without changing stress or sleep. And we had biohackers who tracked all of that. So they had the Oura ring and everything else showing I didn't change anything else apart from eating 30 different plants a week. And they would have a significant reduction, like 4 or 5 years within 3 to 6 months. So you can change your biological age with a simple dietary intervention, which is cheap. You can go to market and get a bunch of different vegetables and just make sure you have diversity in your diet. We don't know if that works for everybody, but it's actually a good educated guess in terms of that. If you're eating local foods, you're also informing your immune system about your environment. And there's a whole book written about that. Other thing is stress. One thing we really don't underestimate or don't know how to measure is the impact of stress. And we see that events like divorce or relationship breakdowns would actually impact you on a deep biological way, in a way that your biological age will go up after personal trauma. And then you recover after time. But also one nice anomaly or phenomenon that we like is that people who meditate usually have a better score. So meditation is also something that's very underestimated, and we don't know how to measure it as well, or at least not as a layman who's doing it for fun. But this is a nice way to have an objective way to know that what you're doing daily for maybe 10, 20 minutes, or maybe better half an hour, is actually impacting how long you're going to be healthy and how long you're going to live. So it's a nice way to give us feedback that all these simple things that we do day to day have a massive impact on our future health, and we can now reliably measure it.
That's the amazing part about finding out your biological age, is that you can change things by changing your lifestyle and trying to manage some of the things that you might need to work a little bit on, whether it's stress management or diet, fitness. I just wanted to remind everybody that we are open for questions. And Sishan on the audience, I've been trying to bring you up a couple of minutes now. So I don't know, you want to leave the room and come back so that I can bring you up? Oh, there you are. Please go ahead. Welcome to the stage, and thanks for being here with us. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to ask Nikolina how she views GlycanAge in the context of other biomarkers that are sort of emerging, like inflammatory age. There was a recent paper published in Nature Aging with David Furman as the senior author, and then obviously the epigenetic aging clocks that have been sort of out there for a little bit longer. How she places GlycanAge in the context of those three, and how she envisions the future of measuring biological age. Thank you very much.
obviously we're very biased to glycans. So yeah, I would say best to read the data and then judge for yourself. But what we like about glycans is that they have a genetic influence, they have an epigenetic influence, and they encapsulate your current behavior and lifestyle. So they give you a very complete picture. And also they're the ultimate layer of molecular complexity that we have. So if we're really wanting to understand how biology works, we should include glycans. And we have done, so we've analyzed over 150,000 people so far in research with support of the Human Glycan Project. And some of these were longitudinal, so we followed them for 20, 30 years, like the twins or the EPIC Biobank. And we really connected them already to all kinds of associations. We know what the genetic influence is, and we can interpret it from a way that it really is a nice understanding of what's going on currently in your body. With epigenetics, I think the problem they had with the first generation clocks is when they model it to chronological age, and we're also modeled to chronological age. So we did the same. And what was funny, 2 weeks ago, actually, we realized that Steve Horvath, who published the first epigenetic clock, published his paper on the 10th of December 2013. And we've published our first glycan paper on the 10th of September 2013. So we published on the same date 8 years ago. And the difference with epigenetics is that you can do this in thousands of labs around the world. So lots of people had access to the technology. While these high throughput glycan analyses are analyzing the human glycan in volume, you can only do in 2 places around the world, and also in 2 places in Europe. Like our lab is in Croatia, and a lot of times when something comes from Stanford compared to something coming from Croatia, it's judged in a very different way. So we actually spoke to David a year and a half ago, and we were on our scientist was in a lot of panels together with him and lots of the others in the company. And when they published their paper last year, they said they were the first. Well, we are certainly the first infloaging clock. But we haven't had a comparison study with them. So we haven't done, with epigenetics, we had a nice comparison study. That's the one done by Edinburgh. It was looking at the first generation clocks. So those clocks are known to be very accurate to chronological age, but they're not so meaningful for your future health. There are better epigenetic clocks now, which are modeled in a different way, and like the group GlycanAge clock, which is modeled on mortality, and that's probably a bit more scary, but also a bit more interesting, and other ones as well. And then you have the phenotypic epigenetic age, which is still looking at the clinical biomarkers. So it's still, for example, if somebody has an existing condition, then he's very high, and it's impossible for him to go down on the clock, because phenotypic aging happens after the molecular aging. And the glycans are the first, so they're the first molecular signature, and then you get to the phenotype a bit later on. So they can be very useful in prevention instead of just identifying what's going wrong. So yeah, so I think that's a good comparison. But the IAGE, we haven't done any comparison. They do have a smaller data set, so they only looked at 5,000 people. We looked at 150,000 from various different cohorts. So I think that our data is currently more robust, but they are growing, and they have some nice plans for the future.
Thank you, Nina, and thank you for your question. To let me ask a question next, but I wanted to let everybody know that for our MYKIGAI newsletter tomorrow morning, I will be going over my own personal experience of doing my GlycanAge test. And there will be a video, all the images for you to see how it works. And more importantly, for our subscribers, as I said, our mission at MYKIGAI is making longevity accessible. They are going to have access to a two-test kit, which is important because the first one you measure where you're at, and then the second one you measure the changes of you did to see if your lifestyle did make a difference in your GlycanAge. We are going to be offering the two-test kit for an amazing members prize that will save you over $200. So all our MYKIGAI subscribers will have access to that. If you're not subscribed to our newsletter, please go ahead. It's on our on my link on both Twitter and Instagram. And more importantly, you get to see how it works. It's sometimes a bit difficult to do it just spoken voice, but with video and images, I feel it makes a great difference. So, Avi, I will let you, again, I want to remind everybody that this is a 1 hour call. So if you wanted to ask a question, please feel free to do it now. Otherwise, you can always email us or send us a message. And of course, you can always be in contact with Nina as well. Avi, please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. Um, yeah, I mean, lots of fantastic and interesting discussion. And I noticed that Catherine is in the room, and other colleagues, Nikhil, who are working with medics. So Catherine is a doctor, and I kind of wanted to phrase this question in two ways. So, I mean, I have done, or I am a biomarker of longevity kind of scientist, and what I wanted to know is that, are there studies that is looking at glycans? And one of the biggest problems that we have, just to frame this question properly, is that there's this bottleneck that happens early in life where people's biomarkers are easy to detect. And then after a certain time, they kind of diverge uh, generously. So different people age at different levels and rates, and biomarkers of aging become highly complex. And so then we have to suffice ourselves with disease markers. And that's what clinicians use in the clinic because it gives them a readout that they can do something about. And I know, Nikolina, you pointed out succinctly how GlycanAge can help you and enable you to change your lifestyle, and you can see a readout in that. But what I wanted to know is that, are there any longitudinal studies or even cross-sectional studies, and maybe you can explain what the difference is between those two, that showcase mortality? I know you talked about GlycanAge, mortality or disease mortality even, and the relationship with GlycanAge and disease-based mortality, or just all-cause mortality. And if not, then are there studies being planned and other groups doing these studies? Finally, as I invoked the clinicians earlier, how can GlycanAge be used at a clinical level? Those are just the two questions. Thank you.
That's quite a few questions. So we have a mortality cohort that's going to be published in a few months. But we did a life expectancy study a few years ago. It was actually published last year, where we looked at 30 different countries and 100 people from each, and then we had 10,000 people as a baseline, and we correlated your glycans or your GlycanAge to life expectancy in a certain country. So it correlated with the country's life expectancy, but also the development index. So there was a big socioeconomic impact on your glycans. And then we also looked at, in the UK, first generation and second generation of immigrants. So we looked at Indian British, Caribbean British, or Afro-Caribbean British, and European immigrants, first and second generation. And their glycans change in the second generation to be more similar to white British. So there's a huge environmental or socioeconomic impact that you have on your GlycanAge. The mortality cohort is COVID. So we did already correlate your GlycanAge or these certain glycans to being more predisposed to severe COVID-19. We didn't use this, we didn't publicize this, or it is published in the journal, but we didn't use it commercially as a company because we don't want to talk about it yet until the pandemic is really over. And we have a big study now where we follow people longitudinally from when they enter the hospital, they're COVID-19 positive, and then we follow them. And this change in GlycanAge from entering the hospital, how significant and rapid it is, predicts mortality. So if you're looking at as a biomarker to evaluate different longevity therapies and drugs, I think it's an excellent biomarker. I actually don't know how large the COVID cohort was, but of course you can always do a larger one, and it would be nice to have a clock similar to Graham, but it wouldn't be commercial. It would maybe be for research use only, or for research for longevity scientists. And then you had another question, which was, how do you use this in practice? We work with all prevention-related private clinics. So it's everybody who we say is paid to keep people healthy, or so we have a lot of studies where we associate glycans to when you develop a disease. So they're very nice for prevention, but also managing of treatment is a nice application as well. And the clinics which are the most adoptive in a way are either functional medicine or their longevity medicine. So you have a lot of new practices which are coming up out and they're labeled as longevity medicine. So for them to offer longevity, they have to measure it. Otherwise, how do you know that this is longevity? And we have a couple of these practices that we worked with. Some of them were around for 20 years. There's one in New York, and the physician has had the practice for 25 years. So he has had patients who've been with him from the age of 50 to 75. And we looked at all of his uh, long-term patients, and all of them were phenomenally younger. So we asked him what type of magic does he do, and he does a lot. He looks at 300 different biomarkers and uh, replacing hormones as well, along with a lot of different things and supplements. So it's a very complex um, uh, protocol that he developed over a couple of decades. But then now we also have about 100 or 150 of his patients longitudinally. So when they enter the clinic and then followed 3 to 6 months later, and he measures them every 3 months, and his patients predictably, so they come in and they're around their age, so their GlycanAge is 2 years under or 2 years above or around their age somewhere, and then they very predictably decline, or they become much younger, sometimes 2 decades younger, within 6 months. So what he does, we say, is magic, but he does a very good job optimizing his patients, and he's obviously done this for a very long time. You have lots of new practices. I think when the practices are new, they're still figuring out what works. And then there's a little bit more trial and error, because I don't think we fully really know what longevity medicine is. It's still very much guesswork. We haven't had the first human longevity trial yet, so a lot of it is guesswork. But there is some things which have a significant impact, and you do need to go to a physician for it, because we can't prescribe any drugs as a commercial company. We can only give you lifestyle intervention, and after one point, lifestyle intervention isn't enough, and it particularly isn't enough in menopause. So I think that's really one point where you need your physician.
Thank you for that, Nina. I am going to ask one last question, and I'm going to let Girish and Avi also do so. So, one thing that I think I talk about a lot, and it's like my passion is trying to make longevity a lifestyle that people practice. And by longevity, I mean preventive health, or focusing on how to lead a healthier life rather than arriving at the point where we are in the reactive healthcare system right now. What do you think in the future a diagnostic like yours could look like in terms of something that people will it be something that could become a very easy thing to do for everybody eventually, or is that the kind of future you want to see in terms of a longevity lifestyle? What do you think will be the inflection point for people to really get involved in this way of living their everyday life, in which they're taking care of their health proactively, or creating health rather than managing disease?
So that's the true potential of glycans, but it's not just glycans. There's many other things we can measure which are going to help us predict health. But glycans are very powerful because they have all of this different information encapsulated into a molecule which does the damage, or it does the work. And we already have in research specific glycans where we associated them with where they change 7 years before you're pre-hypertensive, or they change 10 years before a heart attack or a stroke. They change up to 7 years before you develop diabetes type 2. And the first ones that were discovered, it was about 30 years ago, is a certain glycans change a decade before you develop rheumatoid arthritis. So they're very prognostic. And I think what's not nice about our healthcare today is that everything comes as a surprise. Something bad happens, or we develop something, and it's always a surprise. It just hits us. And what we'll have in the future, we'll know these things way in advance. We'll know that we have this risk, or we'll know that we're actually developing this condition. We're halfway there. And we know that maybe when we change our lifestyle in this way, we reduce this. So we gain a couple more years of being healthy, and we can manage it. So nothing will be a surprise. We'll control our health fully one day, where everything will be familiar, and we'll know exactly how our behavior is influencing what's going to happen to our health in the future, and we'll be able to measure it, uh, moderate it, and intervene at the right time points instead of waiting until it's too late.
Thank you. We're going to go to Girish and Avi for a couple of last questions.
Sure, yeah. This has been such a great conversation. So, last question, I have to make it a three-parter, but it's going to be a simple one. Number one is in aggregate, and I know everybody has a personalized response. In aggregate, what seems to be the most effective lifestyle intervention for slowing down or reversing an individual's glycan age? And then part two would be what lifestyle habit seems to accelerate glycan age the fastest? And then I guess the third part is there a certain age in which the glycan age is refractory or resistant to change? What I'm trying to get at here is it ever too late to make these lifestyle changes in order to, at least as reflected by glycan age, reverse or slow down our biological age? Thanks.
So we see that when people are measuring themselves in their 20s and 30s, very small changes they make have a very significant impact in a not too long of a time frame. When you're in, let's say, late 40s or 50s, then you can still have a lifestyle intervention, but it takes a bit more time. So we see it takes a bit more time for those years to decline. So maybe you have a whole year of efforts in terms of changing your lifestyle, and then you only reduce 2 years. But then you give it another year and you reduce another 10. So it takes a little bit longer to get to the same point the older you are. And of course, you get to a point where you already have a condition or you have multiple conditions, and then you can have high glycanage, and it's really hard to get it down. Although we do have people who have an existing condition who are younger, but they are managing it. So it's an autoimmune disease, which is very well managed, or it's Parkinson, but it's very well managed. And they will probably also have extra years of healthy life because they're managing their condition in a very good way. But yeah, of course, the earlier you do it, the better. And the sooner you know, the more time you have to do something about it.
Oh, and I guess the other question is in aggregate, is there any particular lifestyle change that
Yes.
seems to be, yes?
So the one we know now for sure is weight loss, but we don't know what that works for you until you trial it. But we know that weight loss, and this is proven in hard science. So this is proven in 2000 twins, followed over 20 years, plus intervention. So a caloric restriction diet. And then also we had a bariatric surgery cohort. So lots of forms, natural weight loss, caloric deficiency, and also surgery have an impact of reducing your glycan age predictably. The only other one, which is as predictable, is estrogen replacement in menopausal women. We're still looking at perimenopause properly, so we really want to understand when, what type in perimenopause, but in menopause, yes, you'll have an increase in glycan age and you will predictably improve it with the right type of intervention. Same as for men, we don't have, we do actually. So we did have a placebo control trial in men, and for men, it's actually also estrogen. So men were also suppressed their hormones, and then they were given testosterone, or they were given testosterone, but the aromatase was blocked. So the conversion of testosterone to estrogen was blocked. And when you block this conversion in men, then they become pro-inflammatory and their biological age goes up. But if you don't block it, it's actually the estrogen that moderates or has the benefit in men as well. But it can't be in the reverse. So if you have too high estrogen as a man, then that also is actually pro-inflammatory and your GlycanAge will be higher. So it's this kind of optimal balance of the immune system, and hormones play a huge role there. We don't yet know about other interventions, not in terms of hard science. We know anecdote in individual examples. So we had quite a few now where they introduced diversity of plants, and they have a very predictable result within 6 months. So what's good for your microbiome is also good for your GlycanAge. And we did do also some hard science where we looked at fecal microbiome transplant, which is um, a little bit drastic, but it helps with some conditions. And yes, fixing your microbiome fixes your GlycanAge as well, or it goes as far as um, uh, it impacts it in a significant way. So eating a diet that's good for your microbiome is going to have a positive impact on your GlycanAge. We don't know about meditation. We don't know about any other stress management. In sports, we know that interval training, and we mainly saw positive effects with sprint training. We haven't done yoga yet. We haven't done a lot of exercise types, but we know the sprint training makes you younger within a couple of months. And any type of potentially acute stress could be positive. So anything that you don't like intermittent fasting, maybe cold therapy, all of these things could potentially be very positive based on this intermittent stress theory, but we haven't proven it in hard science. So this is something that you would trial and see how it works for you. Most important is that you don't overdo it and you don't turn it from acute and positive stress to negative and chronic stress. But Girish, to your point, I would love to do meditation. We're trying to recruit some people now to do a study.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Laura and Girish. So I'll post the last question, and then of course a round of thank yous. I was just curious. Oh, so this is actually not a question from me. This is from Catherine, who is currently seeing a patient, but she was in the chat earlier, and she mentioned that she would be interested, and Nikolina in collaboration, to test out the GlycanAge with her patients. She's very confident that her current markers that she's using are very prognostic of longevity. So she's using visceral fat, skeletal muscle mass, inflammatory markers, and other metabolic markers. Alongside that, she's layering on functional markers like DEXA and coronary calcium scores and things like that. And like you said, she's using treatments like changing their diet, supplements, sleep, hormone, and of course other pharmaceutical treatments depending on who the person is. So what I just wanted you to ask is that for clinicians who want to collaborate, but like, for example, Catherine, but they don't really have the administrative staff to support that because they're already busy with patients and things like that. Do you have a roadmap for collaboration for growing GlycanAge for at the clinics for people like Catherine who are clinicians but are also interested in the academic side of testing out GlycanAge in their patients?
Yes, we can do all of that. I Catherine has my email, so if she wants to, but basically we have a whole support system. If she wants us to send kits directly to her patient's home, we can do this. She can offload the interpretations to us, so we would interpret the results for the patient, so they would understand from from what we know in science what is influencing their score and what it means for them. And we can also combine it with medical history, so they have a little bit more of a um, understanding of it. But then every intervention is based on her intervention, and I would love to collaborate. Any physicians who are doing something interesting, if we can follow their patients longitudinally, and also it's very exciting when they're doing so many different things together. So for DEXA scans, they were actually in the comparison study with all the other um, molecular clocks, and they were also very prognostic and almost as predictive as glycans. So there is a lot of other technology that we already have and that we can be using. A lot of it is in private care, and we love to collaborate. We love to publish papers. We're a research lab first, so if she wants to do research together, we even have some grants which we can reach out to and help subsidize the costs of the analysis, because it is currently expensive in the lab.
Amazing. Thank you, Nikolina. And I lied. Laura has the last question.
Well, I thought you were going to ask it, Avi, but then you asked this one. I think in a way our call today was an amazing lesson on a bit of biology and biological age and glycans, but I wanted to bring it back to the consumer and to the general public. In our last the future of longevity panel discussion, Nicolina, we talked about and you know this is one of my favorite subjects, branding longevity. I have to say that GlycanAge is doing an amazing job at bringing the product to for our consumer audience. How did you work on it, or what are some of the key factors, key things that you're working on to make sure that people understand the science and that they know this is something that they can also try, and to make it more consumer friendly so that longevity is branded in a better way?
So I actually think we're doing very poorly. Well, I think our problem is we came from a research lab. So everything we said was written by scientists. And it took us a very long time to translate it in a way that anybody can understand and relate with. So I think we're getting there, but there's a long way to go. On the aging longevity side or slowing down biological aging, it's still pretty new to most, and there is still a little bit of a stigma about aging, which is changing because there's some phenomenal scientists and other uh, longevity advocates which are changing that narrative that you can actually understand, yes, I can slow down my biological aging, and if I do this, that can preserve my health for much longer than if I don't have this information and I don't do something with it. So I think that concept is becoming mainstream. And I think that's quite powerful because it's different to the whole health industry we had as a standard, because a lot of the um, health trends were not actually as deeply validated in science. So we had a lot of nutritional misconceptions, we had a lot of exercise misconceptions, lots of other trends which were not really as well validated as what's happening in some of the aging research. But it is quite early, so we don't have all the answers. We're looking for them, and we are quite far. And we're very good with lifestyle intervention, at least in terms of GlycanAge. It will change in a significant way. And it makes a lot of sense when you follow it on yourself and you see what's having an impact for you as an individual, and how you can manage that and revert it. Another big important thing is when the scientists created it, they said they thought this was it. We create this advanced test, which is has a very hard side, very advanced, but consumers don't want to know their biological age. They want to control their biological age, or fix or reverse or slow down their biological age. So you can't just sell a test. You can't just give them a problem, which is, oh, your age is not as you want it to be. You also have to give them a solution. And that's why you have this really good support system. And it is physician led. So it is conversations with a doctor. And we do have an AI we're developing in the background, which is making some of those conclusions and is going to be giving you some automated guidance, because not everybody has half an hour to talk to a physician. But there's a big emotional component to it too. If your result is not what you want it to be, you want to talk to a human being. You want to be upset. You want to be angry that it's not what you want it to be. And it's actually quite nice when you have a human there to help you turn that into empowerment. Because if you can respond to it in a positive way and do something about it, and that's what I love about what we're doing, because we're doing really well in terms of reducing biological age years, and we actually started calculating this a few months ago, and we reduced 1,000 years of biological age, which means 1,000 extra years of healthy life for our consumers. And this is really hard because we're working against aging. So we're really making an impact of what you do when you have your results. And particularly when you have poor results, nobody wants to be older, not even if you just not even if it's just saying biologically older, so you're visually looking young, but you're biologically older. Everybody sees it as a personal insult, and they want to do something about it. So it's a very empowering tool to create behavioral change. And we see that really works, but it needs the right type of support and kind of service around it for it to be helpful for people. And that was a very long answer. I'm sorry.
No, it was a great answer. I think what you're trying to say is also the experience. And making it a great experience is part of any product people love. So the providing the service of being able to speak to somebody and decode what the data means is very important, because there's so much data out there, but what you do with it is really what matters. So thank you for that. Thank you for being here to talk about biological age, and thank you to my co-mods Avi Roy and Girish Harinath. Thank you, everybody who was in the audience. Again, if you want to find out more about the actual test, our newsletter tomorrow at MYKIGAI is going to have all about it. And again, if you're curious about trying it for our members, we do have this amazing offer. We're trying, our mission is to make longevity accessible to the general public and for people to try it for the first time and try to figure out how it is, know more about the science, why it matters. And when we say longevity at MyKigai, we mean matching your health span to your lifespan. It's not about how long you live, but how long you live with quality of life. And maintaining health will make a great difference in the aging process. So, with that said, we are going to continue to have this series every week on Wednesdays, and I hope to see a lot of you. Please follow the club. On my links, you can see our find our newsletter or website, mykigai.com. Please follow the moderators and our guests. And I hope to see a lot of you. And most importantly, I hope that you do get on a longevity lifestyle. Thank you again.